Hello friends, lovers, enemies. Welcome back to Welcome to Successville. This week I have not one but two guests, Natalie and Naomi Evans, who you might know from their anti-racism Instagram account at Everyday Racism. Natalie and Naomi are people who I've known online since 2020 because that's when our anti-racism Instagram accounts started to get big at the same time. For anyone who doesn't know, I used to use my Instagram account at Official Millennial Black for a really similar thing to what Everyday Racism still do. But while they had each other, I ran it alone, and I ended up finding it really overwhelming to constantly have to talk about the worst things that are happening in the world. So it's great to catch up with them to talk about success and activism and why it's important to have a really clear idea of what success means to you individually. So let's go. Hello, lovely listeners. It's me, your friend and host, Sophie Williams, and this is Welcome to Successville, the podcast where every week I speak to a different successful guest and ask, what is success? How do you know when you've got it? And is it really all it's cracked up to be? This week, I am thrilled to be joined by Naomi and Natalie Evans. Naomi and Natalie are sisters, authors, anti-racist educators and natural communicators who draw upon their lived experiences to drive the work that they do. At the heart of their work is a commitment to empowering people to make a difference in the world. Naomi and Natalie believe that education and action are fundamental routes to stopping social injustice. They are the founders of Everyday Racism, the largest anti-racism Instagram platform in the UK. They are award-winning and were chosen as the big issue changemakers for 2024. Day to day, Naomi still teaches 2 days a week at a secondary school, and Natalie works full-time for Everyday Racism. Naomi and Natalie, hello and welcome to Successville.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi, thank you so much for joining me today. So, as everyone does when they have amazing guests like you on their projects, we started out by reading your bio. And obviously when we go to do talks, when we go to festivals, when we sort of do the work that we do, people often read our bios to start out the conversation, just to give people a little clue about who we are. And I don't know about you, I often find myself a little bit awkward while my bio is being read out. I don't always find it the most comfortable experience. So I wanted to ask you, just to start out with, how does it feel to sit and have someone read your bio back to you?
It's strange. I think it was interesting because we've recently just updated the bio. So it was the first time I was hearing it back and I was thinking, is that good enough? Have we put in enough? So I think I was sort of listening to it from that lens, but usually I listen to it and think, oh yeah, I forgot we did that and we've done that, and oh yeah, we've achieved quite a lot. That's really cool.
I think sometimes when I hear my bio, I feel quite detached from it, and when I hear somebody reading it, I often think it's about somebody else. And when I hear it, I think, wow, that sounds fantastic. And then I'm like, oh, that's actually us. Because we don't really sit down and write down and read over the things that we've achieved in the last few months, years, decades. So I think actually it's really lovely to hear somebody read that out about you. It's a good reminder, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I think we've definitely grown over time with our bio, because in the early days, if we did like a panel, I remember people would read other members of the panel and their bio and it was amazing. Then it was just like us and it was like Naomi and Natalie Evans, sisters, founders of Everyday Racism. And that was like it. And it wasn't because we hadn't done anything.
No, but we just didn't realise that you needed to actually add in all the things that you've done. So I think we've become a bit more confident with sharing everything.
I completely get that feeling, because no one tells you how to do it to begin with,
No.
right? You just find yourself, and we'll talk about how you gained a profile and sort of how that might have been a little bit unexpected. I definitely recognise that feeling of being sat on stage next to amazing people and hearing these great things. And I guess to begin with, not even realising that they'd written them themselves. Just like, oh, they've done this great stuff, and the host has written out this amazing thing.
That's it.
It's so funny. I really think that the bio is this sort of two-sided thing, because when something big happens, I try to make a little list of like things I did in 2022, things I did in 2023, but I never quite remember. So the bio is, for me as well, the closest that I have to that little
to a record,
that little memory tool.
Yeah, and I think that's really important.
We're going to talk about your successes as adults and why you are so successful and residents of Successville in a moment. But before we go into adult achievements, I always like to start with my guests as young people. And so I'd love to know about your relationship to success as younger people. Did you get good grades? Did you win awards? Did you have a vision for what being successful adults might look like?
Yeah, I think for me, probably a big part of how I viewed success was around school and studies and academia and things. So we live in an area that still has the 11 plus. So most students in year 6 take a test, and then they're able to choose to go to a grammar school, which just takes like the top 25% of the students. And I definitely had this thing, and I don't really know where it came from, but it wasn't from my mum. She didn't put that pressure on me, but I was like, I have to pass this test. I have to pass this test in order to go to a grammar school, because I put a lot of weight on studying. Actually, what happened was I passed one of the tests and didn't pass the other. There were 2 tests. But because my grades were quite high, my mum was able to appeal, and I was able to go to the grammar school. And I was very, very proud of myself for being able to say that I had got into grammar school and things like that. But then I think there was also this overhang of the whole time feeling like, should I be here? Because actually I didn't pass both tests. So I was navigating that. By the time I finished, it was fine. I did just as well as my peers. There wasn't any sense that I shouldn't have been there. For me, it was always rooted in passing things, getting high marks, public achievements, certificates, awards, things like that. I was quite driven by that, whereas I think you were quite different.
Yeah, I was different, but I think it took a while for me to realise that. So Naomi's the oldest, and so I think like growing up with siblings, as the youngest at the time, you sort of look up to, your sibling and think, right, well, that's how I need to be. And so I remember saying to my mum, oh, am I going to do the 11 plus? And at the time, my mum obviously very politely was like, it's very unlikely that you're going to do the 11 plus. Obviously didn't say it as harsh as that, but I think that was kind of the realization of, oh, we're very different. I'm not academic in that way. I don't like school. I don't strive to have the best grades, because I knew I was never going to get that. So I think it was kind of like the penny dropped when I realized I wasn't, I guess, living up to your level in that way. And then when I realized I wasn't, I had to change my perspective. And so that was hard, because when you're younger, no one's really telling you it's okay if you don't achieve that. At those times, it was very much like you have to get the best grade, you have to do really well, and then you'll get a good job, and then you'll be successful. So I think I had to unlearn that myself and realize, okay, that isn't the way I'm going to be successful. And then it's that thing of like, okay, well, what does success actually look like, and what does that mean to me? But that's hard as a young person, especially when no one's really telling you that.
Yeah.
So then I think for me, it was about, okay, I know I'm not going to get the grades, but what am I good at and what do I enjoy? And at the time, I didn't know I was dyslexic, so that obviously factored into it, but I hadn't been diagnosed then. So then it was like, okay, well, what can I do? And I knew that I was a very practical person that can put things together. And so then that felt like I could be successful in that way. But it's hard.
Yeah, it must be so hard when you're young. I'm also the younger sister, and my sister also went to grammar school, passed the 11 plus, and I took the 11 plus and didn't pass it at all. And so I also remember having this strong feeling of, okay, well, she's the smart one, and I need to figure out what I'm going to be, because it's not that. And I ended up doing fine in school. I got grades that I was happy enough with. I went to university, and none of that held me back. But it's really tough. I really felt like I had failed from that age.
And we still model success in education around grades. That hasn't changed. So even though we completely understand that the grades that you get at GCSE and A level, for example, mean very little after that, it's just the stepping stone to the next thing. We know that depending on what your model of success looks like, you don't need to pass those exams to be able to get some of the things that you want, but we still measure children in this way, and that hasn't evolved. That's a real fault in the education system that we have. And it does add to that framing of what we think about in terms of success.
Absolutely. And you must see that actually in your role as a teacher, because you, as well as doing all the amazing stuff that we're going to talk about in a second, you do the amazing job of teaching in a secondary school 2 days a week. Do you see that in the young people that you spend time with? Do you see these same anxieties about having to be quote unquote successful now, and if not now, then never?
Yeah, because the way that we test is still driven by building up to this one moment. So we're still reinforcing that feeling of you're either going to do it or you're not. So it's very difficult to navigate, but we know that it's not a good model for children to put them under that kind of pressure. We know now so much more about how the brain works and about how we function as humans. We know so much more about neurodiversity and all of these things, yet the system hasn't adjusted to that.
I used to do well in exams overall because I have a really good memory. And I think that recall still tricks people into thinking that I'm cleverer than I am, because I can just regurgitate some stuff and people are like, oh, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what it means, but I've said it and I've tricked you.
Exactly. There is definitely a sense of, people who are able to articulate in a certain way. There's like a hierarchy of, who we will listen to, just in the way that they will present information to us, when actually sometimes like the substance of what's being said is not there. So yeah, there's a lot of layers to it.
Absolutely. So our listeners will probably know you most and best from your social media account and presence. And that is very much a continuation of this conversation, I think, about how we articulate information and who we listen to information from. So your account, Everyday Racism, is a space in which you raise and hold discussions about race and equality in a very public setting of Instagram. You're putting this information out, you're sharing your lived experiences, you're sharing resources and knowledge for people. Could you tell me a little bit about that account and how it came to be, and what it was like watching it gain followers, essentially, what it was like watching that become big in real time?
Yeah, so we grew up in a small town called Margate, which was a very white majority town. So there weren't many people that kind of looked like us. And I think living kind of in the seaside of the country when you're a Black person or a person of colour is a very, very unique experience. So I think for us, we kind of had to navigate that in our own ways. And we were talking about it and we're like, wouldn't it be great to just have a space where, people in the UK who experience racism can come together and kind of talk about their experiences, because there's something really powerful about being able to have shared experiences and, you know, sharing kind of stories, but also like knowing that you're not on your own, because we're very lucky in the sense that we have each other. But what if you're someone that doesn't have anyone, you know, and it's quite a lonely, isolated experience? So we kind of chatted about that and we sat on that for a bit, but we kind of didn't really know how we would even do that. So we kind of parked it. And then like a year later, I think it was like 2019, I witnessed a racist incident on a train. I had recorded it for kind of police purposes. And yeah, it was basically between the train conductor and two white guys on the train. And the train conductor was a black guy and they racially abused him. And me and the train conductor were the only people that kind of stood up and said something. And that wasn't really unusual. I've kind of been in those environments many times. But I think for me, that the most frustrating thing was that the train was full. It was absolutely packed. And not one other person said anything. It was just the two black people in the carriage that said something. And I remember calling Naomi and saying, like, what is it? Why is it that people just, they don't know what to say, or they know it's not okay, but they can't stand up and say anything? We're really like processing that and just that frustration of like, why is it when I look back at all the times that I've experienced racism, I'm the only one that says anything. I've not had one friend who's gone, actually, that's not okay, you know, or I've laughed along with it or just let it go because, you know, like you have to choose your battles. And it was, by this time, it was the start of 2020 and the murder of Ahmaud Arbery had just happened. He was running and he was killed. And again, that kind of started this conversation with people of like, oh, that's not okay. Isn't it terrible what's going on in America? And then my friend was like, can I share this video on Twitter? Because I'm just having lots of these conversations. I actually think this video is a really helpful way for people to understand how racism shows up in the UK and the fact that no one says anything. And so he put it out and it went viral. It had nearly 1 million views or something ridiculous. And I was reading the comments and it was, you know, oh my goodness, I can't believe this happened, you know, or like, well done for saying something. And I remember Naomi kind of, we were living together at the time and she came into my bedroom, was just on the laptop, like staring at the computer, like what's going on. And we both kind of looked at each other and said, I think this is a time, let's start everyday racism. Like, I think we should start it. And then, as we know, the murder of George Floyd happened and there was this kind of global awakening of, oh my goodness, racism is a thing and I need to do something about it. Which was a very strange time, very strange.
And it was also lockdown.
And it was lockdown, yes. But then it just absolutely spiraled and we started to then put kind of resources and educational content out around language and what is okay and not okay to say and what does this mean. And I think people just were like, wow, we didn't know this stuff. We tried to make it as accessible as possible. You know, we know at that time there were so many books coming out, which was great, but it was just like trying to make things as more accessible as we could. So then it just absolutely snowballed and we just were inundated on kind of followers and messages. And it was wild.
And it has, as you say, become the biggest anti-racism education account in the UK. It's really filling in a need and a niche that people have needed and desired. And I think it does an incredible public service of sharing information and sharing language and being this really approachable and free resource for people. And I think it's really interesting because when we get sort of surveys back about what young people want and imagine for their lives and see as success, so many people dream of being influencers, right? They dream of having that blue tick, of having that number of followers. Does having that as an account, does having that blue tick, does that feel like a success to you in and of itself?
I think what I view as success has really changed since kind of having on paper what people would say is, you know, like a big influencer account. If you'd asked me a few years ago and you'd said, you know, you're going to have this big following and it's going to mean that you're going to be able to write a book and do talks and things like that. And yes, that on paper reads like success, but actually the reality of it is very, very different. And that's not to be ungrateful, because I know that we have had some amazing opportunities because of that and because of, you know, the following and things. But with that also comes the realization that with all of those things, actually everything within your own life is still there. I remember my friend saying, like, she got her teeth done and she had braces for like 2 years. When she had them taken off, you know, her teeth were white and they were straight and they looked absolutely lovely. And I said to her, they look beautiful. Are you really pleased? Are you really happy? And she said, yeah, I am happy with them. Like, they're great. But actually, everything else in my life has stayed exactly the same.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. The teeth didn't change, all the other stuff. And I think that sometimes there can be this thing of like, if I get that, if that happens for me, then everything will be different and I will feel completely different. And that void or the box or whatever it is that you're looking to fill, that will happen. And the reality is, like, I remember we had a few milestones that we wanted to hit. We said, you know, when that happens, we'll have a big celebration. And it's not to knock those things. Some of those things happened and it was beautiful, like the book. I'm really proud of it. And we had such a wonderful time celebrating it. But actually, the stuff that we're dealing with as human beings day to day and the things that we struggle with and whatever, they don't change because you have published something or you've got a load of followers or you get a book advance or whatever. The stuff's still there. And I think for me, one of the biggest realizations was when Natalie and we became a bit frustrated because I think some of the things that we wanted to happen weren't happening. And we were like, what are we doing wrong? Like, what is it? Why didn't that happen for us, but it happened for that person, etc., etc. And we did this exercise around, was it called the Theory of Change?
Theory of Change workshop, yeah.
And it was essentially about really looking at what your values and your goals are. And when we did it, and we went through everything that we wanted to do and wanted to achieve and what we wanted to see happen through everyday racism and the work we did, we realized that all the things that we were like, oh, why hasn't that happened for us? None of them aligned with our values. And we were like, so actually what we're doing is measuring our success based on something that we actually don't even align with. So some of the things like money and possessions and kind of like outward rewards. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with those things. If that's what you want, then that's great and fine and, you know, go for it. But actually, when we wrote down the things that we want, which was like, we want to see the law change in terms of education, and we want to empower young people, and we want to see teachers like upskilled in terms of their racial literacy, like all of those things were nothing to do with those things. Yeah. So it was amazing in terms of helping us to really realign ourselves. And if I'm honest, that has been the ultimate game changer for me, because now when I see things and I'm like, oh, that person got invited to that and that person has been given a free holiday, and I'm like, that's great for them, like enjoy it. But that wasn't what we wanted or set out to do. So why are we disappointed?
Yeah.
Because that wasn't the purpose anyway.
Yeah.
Of us even setting up everyday racism.
I think as well, we were navigating a very strange kind of structure, and maybe Sophie, you might find this as well with your platform, but like being an influencer, but also not in the way where you're influencing like face cream or, you know, selling clothes. It's like you're influence people in activism and anti-racism, right? So yes, we have a massive platform and people are like, whoa, you've done so well. And absolutely, I will not deny that we haven't, but it's very different to someone who is just doing fashion, or someone is just about them as an individual. Our lives are not, it's not the same, because these big brands and companies, which anyway we don't want to be working with because now we know what we want to focus on, but they don't want to work
with political activists.
They don't want to do that, and they're not going to pay you to do that. And, you know, actually on paper, our platform is like, yeah, we should be getting all those brand deals and we should be doing, you know, X, Y, and whatever it looks like. And we know that that's not what we want to do, because it would be weird anyway if we started to then, you know, sell a face cream on our page. It wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. But I think it's like you're also then navigating this new way of influencing, which is very different to what we know and what we understood. And I'm not sure if you found that as well, Sophie.
Yeah, I've absolutely found that. And I think that's such an important and interesting answer, and is exactly why I wanted to ask about this perception of success being related to these follower numbers. Because I think for accounts like yours and accounts like mine, I think the follower number is important in as much as it's the number of people who you've been able to reach to share this message. But you're right, the message for accounts like ours is never going to be, here's a lovely sex toy for you to enjoy.
Yeah.
Because it would be so strange for us to be like, after a long day of fighting racial inequality, I like to relax with my rosebud toy. It's just like, it just wouldn't make any sense for us. But it is so much, these sort of brand deals, these relationships, these partnerships are so much what people, I think, imagine when they think of influencing and when they think of being successful in an influencer space. That I think it has taken a really long time for people to understand accounts like ours. And I think what you're saying, Naomi, about it doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change what's happening in your life. I think we all know that sort of academically, but it's hard not to look at someone who is getting these deals that you believe to be really lucrative and just to say, well, that wouldn't be success for me. That's such a difficult realization to come to, I think.
It is, but I think it's also about knowing really strongly what your core values are and what you're rooted in. Because when you do know that, then for me, it has made it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because I did definitely struggle, and I was navigating, you know, scrolling and comparing myself and all of those things, which are very natural things, I think. But that definitely did help to ground me and root me in, you know, knowing why we're here and what we're going after, because otherwise it is very easy to be distracted.
One of the things that you've both mentioned a few times, and that is on so many people's bucket list of success, on their mental checklist of having made it in some sort of way, is books. And you are the authors of not just one, but 2 books at this point. And I really wanted to take a moment to celebrate that as a success, because that is incredible. And to talk to you about what that was like how that came to be and how that feels to be published, successful authors.
I think that is definitely something that I do feel really proud of. And I look back and think, yes, that was a success.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about like numbers of sales or anything like that. Just the sense of that your words are in print and people are able to access that, and the amount of people that have messaged us and said, this spoke to me, I've given it to that person, they found it really helpful, I'm reading this with my kids. For me, that is the measure of the success of the book. Even if it just helps one or two people to feel valued or seen, like that, means the world. So I do feel really proud of the books. The process, you know, we'd never been through it before. I didn't ever think that I would write a book. And it came about because it was in 2020 and publishing houses suddenly had this, wake up call that they weren't publishing enough Black and brown authors, and they wanted to, right that wrong, I suppose. And we were asked if we'd write an anti-racism book, kind of based on the things that we've been putting on Instagram. And we said no, because there were so many good books coming out, or that had already been published. We'd just be replicating what's already there. We don't have anything further to add. But then one of our friends, he's a father, Black father to 3 mixed race children. And he was like, the book I really would love to read, and I think that you would be the right people to write this, is about what it's like to hold a multiracial identity. And because as a Black parent of mixed heritage children, there are things that I just don't understand about their experience, or things that they're going to be navigating that just weren't like that for me. And so, we wrote that book together and interviewed people. And you're in it, Sophie, as well. And got, lots of different perspectives. We've had a lot of messages about that book and how it's helped people who were navigating their feelings around it, how they've given it to people they know, to family members, friends, and that's partners. That's really meant a lot to us. So I think in terms of success, that really does feel like a success.
Yeah, it feels huge. But I think I still don't feel like it happened, or I still don't feel like we did it. It's strange. It's like the penny still hasn't dropped. Like sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, we wrote a book. Or I'll see friends and they're like, we've done 2 books, and you're like, oh yeah, that's pretty huge. But I think the publishing industry is it's a wild place to navigate. And I think for me, I never really wanted to understand it properly, because I do this thing where I lower my expectations on everything, when it comes to like my birthday or Christmas or like whatever it is. I'm like, just imagine it as the worst day ever, and then anything on top that happens on top of that is great, so. And I think I did that with the book. So I was like, well, just imagine that, like, no one reads it, no one buys it, it's a complete flop, and then that's the worst case scenario. And then anything on top of that is great. And I know there will be people listening like, no, it's about manifestation, like we have to manifest really good things, and and I'm trying to get into that, but that's just like my survival like tactic that I've done my whole life. So I think for this one, for the book, I never really wanted to understand the industry. I didn't want to understand like what it meant to be a bestseller, how many copies you have to sell for it to be successful. I mean, what does that even mean? But like that thing of, okay, so if we sell 10,000 books, that's good, is it? I'm not sure, so I think I just didn't want to know. And also they don't really tell you anything. So I think, again, it was probably one of those things with you, Sophie, we messaged to be like, what does this mean? Is that good? When people say like, oh, they're this bestseller in this category, is that just because on Amazon you were like a top in the number 1? Is that what it is? Because we were that at one point, but we never talk about that because no one's ever said that's a really good thing, So I think it's hard to kind of process some of that. But I think actually going back to what Naomi said, I then just was like, actually, for me, the success in the books of having the 2 books are the fact that people message us, you know, say how it's been helpful. And also with the kids book, Everyday Action, Everyday Change, you know, families contacting us. Like, we had this incident at school. I sat down with my child and we read your book together, and now they really understand, you know, what this is or how this shows up. And I think for me, that's success. And so, you know, obviously, yeah, like in anything, it would be great to be the New York Times bestseller, whatever it is. I don't even know what it is. But actually, in reality, I'm like, no, this is great. This is amazing.
Yeah, it is. One of the things about books being on so many other people's mental success lists is that it is quite an easy thing for other people to point to as this sort of validation of this like thing that you've done. And so now that you've had these things that people publicly view as successful, this really impactful account with a big following that is doing things to tangibly change the world and make things better in that space, and you've got these books that are getting messages from people about how much they've helped, does having public success feel like it can be a constant state? Does being successful create a pressure to continue being successful, to continue working and making? I used to think about success as a thing that you could do and you'd tick it and then like that's just done, you are successful. But now I come to realize or feel that it's never for me a done state. I have to keep on doing more in order to keep on being or feeling or being perceived as successful. And I wondered if that's something that you also feel or worry about ever.
I think I definitely used to feel that pressure, particularly when it comes to, for example, their Instagram account and, you know, following, and there'd be weeks where we'd lose lots of followers and you'd be thinking, oh goodness, okay, that means that we're doing something wrong and, you know, we need to make more content and things like that. But again, I think you have to get really clear for yourself what it is that you're going after. Because if Natalie and my sole aim was to get as many Instagram followers as possible, and that's what we were doing this for, then yes, we would need to make content all the time. We need to be reinventing things and, you know, all of that. But that's not what we're in it for. So actually having really clear what it is that we want to do and want to achieve has taken that pressure off big time, because actually it's also helped us to know what to say yes to and what to say no to, because it's like, does that align with what we're trying to do? Does that feed in and serve the purpose of what we're trying to achieve, or is it just going to zap us of energy? Is it just going to add another layer of pressure? And that's been really helpful in then relieving some of that pressure and anxiety, because actually it wasn't going to serve any purpose anyway. So we don't need to do it.
And I think doing some of those feelings and maybe like, I'm trying to think of the right word. I'll say emotions, but like when we first started the platform, you know, the whole thing of like, you put a post out and it went viral, and, you know, the thing of like, oh my God, we've got this many likes, or, you know, and kind of, wow, these people. And I think for a while after things started to slow down, because obviously it did after 2020, people started to be like, oh well, I've done that now, I've engaged in that, I'll move on. I felt like for a while I was still trying to chase that high of, you know, the okay, I've got to get to that many, this post got this many likes, so it needs to, you know. And I think, as Naomi said, when we really sat down to think about, okay, what are we doing this for? And I realised it's none of that. Obviously, it'd be nice that, you know, our posts get lots of interaction and likes because we want to get the content out there for people to read it. It does take that pressure off. You know, there's things today where I'm like, oh, we should maybe share about this going on, that going on. I'm like, we can do that, or we can just actually focus on the education stuff that we want to do today, because that is the stuff that's really important. And if we want to go back to doing Instagram stuff, then we will, but I'm not going to be, you know,
held to ransom over it.
That's it, absolutely. So yeah, I just kind of feel less sort of stressed about that. I think we used to be like, oh, we've got to do this, got to do that,
and I think we're really lucky in some
really
ways,
lucky,
that we're not dependent. You know, there was that bit where it's like, it would be lovely to have our bills and stuff covered by being able to do this, that through our social media. But there's also a freedom that comes with not having sort of any dependency on it in terms of financing.
I think that's so interesting. It's so many people's dreams, but you're right, it is a huge amount of pressure. You do spend hours making these things that you don't care about. And you're right, for accounts like yours, for accounts that talk about race, it is an uphill battle against a platform that doesn't feel like it wants us there talking about these things. And so I think what you're saying about knowing who you are and what you want to achieve and framing your success in that is so clear and so helpful that I'm going to go away and try and do the same for myself.
Yeah. And I think we have to look at the evidence as well. And if things like being an influencer and having lots of money and being on the television and having high profiles, if that all led to happiness, which I think is a lot of the time what we're talking about when we say success, is we want to be happy in that. We don't want success and to be miserable. So if that led to that sense of happiness and achievement, why are so many people so miserable or depressed or anxious? It's not like people who have those things are walking around going, everything is so great now. A lot of the time when, you know, you hear interviews or you talk to people, they'll say, look at that picture. I was a mess in that pit. Like, I'm smiling, I'm on the red carpet. Actually, I was full of anxiety. I was crying before I'd left, you know, and all of those things. And they'll unpick what was really going on. And so I think, well, the evidence is showing us that those things do not necessarily equate to happiness. So actually, what is it about those things that fill people with anxiety and pressure and all of that?
I think you're so right as well to synthesize that when people are talking about success, a lot of the time they're talking about happiness. And I think for people who don't have happiness as part of their model of success, I think this is where we get into trouble. When people are like, success is having X amount of money, success is having X title or being perceived in this way. I think so often people who haven't done the work that you've done about what am I actually valuing, what am I working towards, we let success be defined by other people's images of us or other people's images of what success could or should be. And I don't think that that leads to people being happy. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about just before we wrap up is about success outside of these public things. Like, Natalie, I know that you've recently become engaged, and Naomi, you're a parent, and you're both doing all of these, you know, amazing and important things outside of this public life that you have. So when you think about success, do you only think about public life, or do you think about success in your more rounded and personal spheres as well?
I used to think publicly, for sure. I remember it was my 30th birthday, so this was nearly 5 years ago, and on my 30th I did a post on Instagram. This was before, like, we had everyday race, anything, and I put, you know, oh, I'm 30 today, and you know, my younger self would be so disappointed, you know. It was gonna be like a nice thing. It started off horrible, but you know, this thing of like my younger self is gonna be so disappointed because, you know, one, I'm not a famous Instagram influencer. Two, I didn't marry the footballer that I wanted. You know, three, I'm not a size 10 or like whatever. Or four, I don't live in a big mansion, you know. And it was like this kind of joke thing of like, and at the time, I think I'd been single for like 8 years. I definitely wanted to kind of be with someone, but I hadn't met anyone, you know, like, and it was like, I'm not married, I'm not this, that, and the other, but you know, I'm happy. And you know, it was kind of that post. And then literally a year later, I had met my partner. I'm now engaged, but at the time, you know, I'd met someone. We had the Instagram account. Lots of things had changed, and it was kind of changed really quickly. And I think now it's so interesting because I kind of got a lot of those things. I'm now, you know, like you say, I'm getting married in August, and that was something that I've always wanted. I've always wanted to be married, and I've always wanted to, you know, have a partner and all of this sort of stuff. And yes, that is success, you know, that's great. But actually, now that I have the things that, you know, compared to that Instagram post that I posted 5 years ago, so many things have changed. Now I've got a lot of those things. Actually, for me, success is really, it is about being happy and just enjoying the smaller things like in life. And I think for me, like, I really think about the things that I have that I'm so grateful for, you know, that I have like my little home, I have my little flat, and I have my cat, and I can eat nice food every day, and I can like go and walk down to the beach. It's all like the things that are basically, you know, not seen as really extravagant, but actually for me, I'm like, God, that's really that I'm so successful in that. And sometimes it can just be things like you got up today and you got dressed and you did a bit of work if you wanted to, or like you just got through the day, like, because sometimes I just have really awful low days that are just not good, and I don't want to do anything. But the fact that I got out of bed and I cleaned my teeth, great, that's success, you know? And so I think I really have to just reimagine some of those things, and actually like those small little things that we see as insignificant, they're not, they're really, really important. Really,
I think similar, just in the sense that I used to think that like my happiness would come from being in a constant state of feeling a certain way. And actually one of the biggest kind of successes I've had is realizing that you're going to be up and down. Life throws stuff at you all the time that you're not expecting. You respond to things in a way that maybe you didn't think you'd respond like that. Like, you're navigating a lot of feelings and emotions and responses to things. But actually, the thing that has really helped me is knowing that I have the tools now to be able to survive those things. So it's not that I won't feel low, but it's that I know that that state is not going to last forever, and that a new state and a new feeling is coming, and I'm able to ride out that low state for however long it lasts. And it's not about being just in one constant state of happiness. And I can accept that maybe tomorrow might be tricky, but I know that I can get through that, and that another moment or few hours or few days of happiness is coming. And I think learning how to ride that out has been really freeing, actually. And again, not seeing success as this, you know, one thing that's going to happen, this one moment, like you were saying, Sophie, tick, done it now, job done. There's going to be so many different ways that it comes, and that's all right.
I love that. And I love how wise you both are. I feel like I'm hosting these conversations about success because I feel like I struggle with it, and I feel as though I should feel more successful than I do. And so I really wanted to bring together some people who I think are massively successful and see if they have any secrets to feeling like that. And I thought the answer would probably be no. But it turns out, yes, you have figured out ways to, know what you want and know what you need and know what feels successful to you in a much, much, I think, better and more mindful way than I have ever considered. So this is great. This podcast is just for me at this point. Just before we wrap up, we always end on some quick fire questions. I do the first one with you, but then I leave you for the rest. So the first thing in the quick fire round is, what is your secret success? What's something that you're proud of that will never make it onto your bio or onto your CV? For me, I'm a really good gift giver. I give gifts that make people feel seen, and I'm really proud of that.
Me, one of my most recent successes is that I ended my marriage, but ended it consciously and ended it, I think, as well as it could be. And I do see that as a success. I think a lot of the time, if you view the end of a marriage, you'd be like, oh, well, that's a failure. And actually, I realized that making that decision to leave something that wasn't right for either of us is a massive success, because it's actually led us both to meet people that make us really happy. So,
amazing.
Yeah. And that wouldn't go in my bio, but I'm quite proud of that.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's amazing.
Okay, I think maybe my sort of secret success is that I feel like I hate saying things like this because I feel a bit narcissistic.
No, that's what this is for.
But no, this is the whole point. No, I think I'm a good friend. I think I'm someone that shows up for people, and can just kind of be there when they need it.
Amazing. Next one is, where or when do you feel the most successful?
For me, it's kind of the end of the day when I'm at home cooking dinner. I love cooking, and I'm just reflecting, and I can just sit down and I don't feel guilty for just sitting and being, because I'm like, I've had a good day, and you've just done, and sometimes even if I haven't done anything, I don't beat myself up about that.
Nice.
I think for me, it's when my children have achieved something, or I see them do something that I'm really proud of. And it makes me feel like, okay, I haven't done all of this completely wrong and wrecked their lives.
No, you haven't. And then our final quickfire question is, Natalie and Naomi, what does success mean to you at this point in your life?
I think success means, for me, it means happiness, but it also means, I think, just doing my best. And that doesn't mean that I'm, grinding all day and like going out and doing all this stuff. But my best could mean, like I said before, I got up and, and I've decided that I'm going to chill today because it's a lot. And I know that comes from a lot of privilege as well to be able to do that. But I think, I think it's a mixture of just doing, what's best for me.
I think for me, success looks like the freedom to be able to make my own choices. That feels like an achievement, to be able to be in that place. And also a certain amount of contentment as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie and Naomi, for coming to Successville. You have been wonderful guests, and it's been fantastic to have you. And I feel like I've learned a lot from our conversation, so thank you from me personally as well. So for our listeners, if they want to learn more about you, follow your work, celebrate your successes in real time, where can they find you?
So if you have social media, you can follow our account at everydayracism_. We also have 2 books, The Mixed Race Experience and Everyday Action, Everyday Change, which is a children's book. So you can, buy those, give them away to people, and read more about our work through our website, which is www.everydayracism.co.uk.
And you can join our book club as well. the Everyday Racism Book Club.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. And yes, enjoy your time in Successville.
Thanks, Sophie.
That was the wonderful Natalie and Naomi Evans. And that's the end of another episode of Welcome to Successville. Thank you so much for listening. I'm putting links to Natalie and Naomi's books, their website, and their Instagram in the show notes if you want to spend more time with them. If you want to spend more time with me as well, you can find me on Instagram at Sophie Williams Official. And that's also where you can send me a voice note if you'd like to share your own thoughts or feelings about success, or if you just want to celebrate a win. And who knows, I might even be able to use it as part of season 2. You can also, if Instagram isn't your thing, send me an email. And you can do that on welcometosuccessville@gmail.com. So that's a voicemail to @Sophie Williams Official on Instagram or welcometosuccessville@gmail.com if you don't want to worry about your voice message being cut off at 60 seconds. And, as always, you get bonus points if you begin your message with "Hello Sophie" and "Successful guest." I'll be back next week when I'll be joined by Donna Patterson, and you can find out how she earned the nickname the Erin Brockovich of Bradford. In the meantime, ratings, reviews and subscriptions are really helpful, especially for a brand new project like this if we want it to be successful. So if you're able to, please rate, review or tell a friend, and that would be really helpful to me. I really look forward to seeing you next week, lovely listeners.